Hello friends, welcome back to True Perspective. I'm Zhenfei. The Pentagon recently informed Congress that it could take up to 6 months to completely clear the mines Iran has laid in the Strait of Hormuz. This means that oil prices may remain high for the next 6 months. Today, Trump posted that Iran doesn't even know who its own leader is right now. The infighting between the hardliners and moderates is simply insane. Looking back at the negotiations between the US and Iran since the fragile ceasefire agreement was reached in April, we've seen Iran's stance flip multiple times. For example, one day the US and Iran jointly announced the reopening of the strait, but the very next day Iran reversed course and declared that the strait would remain under strict control. And even though the US and Iran are technically in a ceasefire period, yesterday Iran still opened fire on 3 commercial ships. At first, these contradictory signals were interpreted as Iran engaging in information warfare. But the reality is that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is overthrowing the Iranian government and taking control of Iran's decision-making. The ceasefire agreement, which was originally expected to expire on Wednesday night, has now been extended by Trump. US officials have revealed that this is a window of opportunity given by the president to the currently divided Iranian regime, allowing them to resolve their internal strife before coming to the negotiating table. However, this extension will not be indefinite. It will only last 3 to 5 days. In 3 to 5 days, will Iran's internal turmoil be able to reach a conclusion? Can the relatively moderate Iranian government suppress the Revolutionary Guard? If not, can these negotiations even continue? Why is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps still struggling desperately under the current circumstances? To understand these questions and to assess how the situation might develop, we can't avoid discussing the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as an organization. Today we'll spend 20 minutes giving you a comprehensive understanding of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a unique entity that can be described as a state within a state in Iran. It all started 47 years ago. On February 1st, 1979, Khomeini returned from exile in Paris and landed in Tehran. At that time, the streets were packed. Everyone came out to welcome his return. The revolution seemed to have succeeded, but Khomeini was well aware that the most dangerous moment of the revolution was not the overthrow of the old regime, but the reshaping of power that followed. Iran's regular army, from officers to soldiers, pledged allegiance to the Shah. They were trained in the American style, equipped with American gear, and at their core, they were pro-Western. Could Khomeini trust these people? No, he couldn't. So he made a decision. He would get rid of all of them. He wanted to build an entirely new army, one dedicated to defending his revolution. On May 5, 1979, Khomeini ordered the merger of the 4 main Islamic militia groups, which were scattered across the country at the time, into a unified force. These 4 forces were the National Guard, the Organization of Islamic Revolutionary Jihadists, the Islamic Revolution Guardians, and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. After the merger, they were collectively known as the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. At first, this force had only about 700 members. Their mission was simple: to protect the new regime and promote the ideology of the Islamic Revolution, which inevitably involved suppressing dissent. To put it bluntly, this was Khomeini's private army. So how did this private army later develop into a massive organization attached to the entire Iranian state? There was a key turning point in this process, and that was the Iran-Iraq War. On September 22, 1980, Saddam Hussein launched a full-scale invasion of Iran. Iraqi troops poured in from the western border, aiming straight for Iran's oil-rich Khuzestan province. For the Islamic Republic, which had only been established for just over a year, this was a life-or-death test. At that time, the most dangerous problem was that Iran's regular army was almost incapable of fighting a war. Why was that? Because after the revolution, Khomeini dealt with a large number of senior officers from the Pahlavi era. Some were executed, some exiled, and others were arrested. As a result, the regular army's chain of command was shattered, experienced officers were lost in large numbers, and the morale of those who remained was unstable. At this moment, the Revolutionary Guard stepped forward. At first, they participated in the war as militias. They had no heavy weapons, no formal military training, and relied solely on ideological fervor and a fearless, almost reckless spirit. At that time, Khomeini also specifically established a volunteer militia organization called the Basij, recruiting young people from impoverished rural areas. Many of them were only in their teens. These children were sent to the front lines to launch so-called human wave assaults. This was one of the most brutal and heartbreaking scenes of the Iran-Iraq War. Tens of thousands of young Iranians wore keys around their necks. Khomeini told them these were the keys to paradise. They charged into Iraqi minefields and machine gun positions. It was through these brutal battles that the Revolutionary Guard underwent a transformation. After 8 years of the Iran-Iraq War, the Revolutionary Guard transformed from a loose militia into a quasi-national army with organization, structure, and its own army, navy, and air force. By the end of the war, the Revolutionary Guard's numbers had swelled from just a few hundred at the beginning to 350,000 troops. The allocation of the military budget also increased from only 7.3% of Iran's military budget in 1980 to 20.3% in 1982, nearly tripling in just 2 years. By 1987, half of Iran's military budget was allocated to the Revolutionary Guard. During this period, in 1983, a significant event occurred. The Revolutionary Guard openly refused to accept the command of Iran's regular army. In any normal country, if a military force refuses to obey unified command, that would be considered outright rebellion. But in Iran, this was tacitly allowed because during the Iran-Iraq War, the Revolutionary Guard became increasingly powerful, and the Iranian political leadership grew more and more dependent on them, needing them to fight the war and not daring to offend them. From this point on, Iran in effect had two parallel armies. The regular army answered to the Iranian government, while the Revolutionary Guard answered only to the supreme leader. By the later stages of the Iran-Iraq War, the battlefield had expanded from land to sea, leading to the famous tanker war. During this period, the Revolutionary Guard developed a unique system of naval warfare. This system is the origin of the combat tactics we see today in the Strait of Hormuz. Because Iraq relied on oil exports to fund the war, Iran wanted to cut off Iraq's economic lifeline, so it began attacking Iraqi oil tankers. But Iraq was clever. When it ran out of its own tankers, it borrowed Kuwait's. So Iran started attacking Kuwaiti tankers as well. As more and more tankers were affected, the global oil market was impacted, and the international community could no longer stand by. As a result, the United States decided to intervene. In July 1987, the US military launched Operation Earnest Will, which was the largest naval convoy operation since World War II. Kuwaiti oil tankers were reflagged with the American flag and escorted through the Persian Gulf by US warships. Faced with American aircraft carriers and destroyers, Iran's regular navy was simply no match. So what could they do? They invented a new type of combat method, which is actually the origin of everything we see today in the Strait of Hormuz. How did Iran confront the US aircraft carriers and destroyers? They invented a new type of naval combat tactic, mounting machine guns and rockets on small speedboats, suddenly charging out from concealed coastal bays and islands to swarm and attack oil tankers. Sometimes they would quickly lay mines to block the shipping lanes. Other times they would launch nighttime raids, withdrawing immediately into shallow waters after the attack. This is the prototype of modern asymmetric warfare, avoiding direct confrontation using cheap, small, and highly maneuverable platforms, such as speedboats, mine-laying, and naval mines, to launch sudden attacks and then retreat quickly. This creates chaos for the regular navy, which has the advantage in numbers and technology, delays their operations, and increases the enemy's response costs. The Revolutionary Guard Navy has also openly trained suicide speedboats, sending boats loaded with explosives toward oil tankers, crashing into them and detonating, causing panic among merchant ships. This kind of asymmetric naval warfare is now commonly referred to as guerrilla naval warfare, also known as swarm tactics. This is not an invention unique to Iran, but in narrow waters like the Persian Gulf, especially the Strait of Hormuz, it is particularly suitable. The waters here are shallow, there are many islands, and the shipping lanes are narrow, which is advantageous for concealment and small boat raids. Meanwhile, oil tankers have to pass through this narrow strait along fixed routes, and the maneuvering space for large warships is extremely limited here as well. So once such a raid occurs, it becomes very difficult for merchant ships and large warships to respond. A destroyer worth over $1 billion might have to face dozens of speedboats coming from all directions at the same time, and each of these boats could be carrying missiles or explosives. How can you deal with that? If it were anyone else, they would probably just have to take the hit. But the US military is not that weak. On April 14, 1988, the US frigate USS Samuel B. Roberts struck a mine in the Persian Gulf. The explosion blew a 4.5-meter hole in the hull, broke the keel, and nearly sank the ship. More than a dozen sailors were injured, and the serial numbers on the mines recovered later matched exactly with those previously seized from an Iranian mine layer. Just 4 days after this incident, the United States launched Operation Praying Mantis, which was the largest naval battle conducted by the US Navy since World War II. Within about 8 hours, the US military destroyed 2 Iranian offshore oil platforms, sank a frigate and a missile boat, severely damaged another frigate, and eliminated several armed speedboats belonging to the Revolutionary Guard. More than half of the Iranian Navy's surface combat capability was wiped out in an instant. This was a crushing blow. However, you should note that there is an issue here. Most of the Navy that was crippled by the US military at the time belonged to Iran's regular Navy, with only a portion being from the Revolutionary Guard's Navy. The Revolutionary Guard, on the other hand, has its own independent Navy, which is a completely separate system from Iran's regular Navy. After the regular Navy suffered heavy losses, the Revolutionary Guard's Navy took the opportunity to rise to prominence in the subsequent Iran-Iraq conflict. They inherited the tactics of guerrilla naval warfare. Very quickly, this kind of asymmetric naval warfare evolved from an emergency combat method into the Revolutionary Guard Navy's systematic way of fighting. Their navy completely abandoned large warships and instead developed a massive fleet of speedboats. How many of these speedboats are there? No one can say for sure. The US Office of Naval Intelligence estimated in 2007 that there were over 1,000. By around 2020, various estimates put this number between 3,000 and 5,000. These speedboats are hidden in fortified bases along Iran's coastline, scattered across the islands of the Persian Gulf. Some of them are equipped with anti-ship missiles, some with rockets, and some may have been designed as suicide attack platforms. The Iranian side claims that some of these speedboats can reach speeds of over 100 knots, which is nearly 185 kilometers per hour. In 2002, during a military exercise called Millennium Challenge, retired Lieutenant General Paul Van Riper played the Red Team, simulating Iran's tactics. He used a combination of swarming small boats and cruise missiles to sink 16 major US warships, including an aircraft carrier, within just a few minutes. Although this was only a simulation, it demonstrated the difficulty of dealing with this kind of guerrilla naval warfare. Now, looking at today, the Revolutionary Guard's so-called blockade of the Strait of Hormuz uses the same tactics as the 1988 tanker war, creating chaos in the narrow strait with low-cost, highly maneuverable platforms leveraging the global oil economy to achieve their own objectives. So the next question to ask is, what exactly are the Revolutionary Guard's objectives? Here, we need to return to discussing the Revolutionary Guard itself. In 1990, 2 years after the end of the Iran-Iraq War, Iran was devastated and in need of reconstruction everywhere. Western companies didn't dare to come, nor could they, because sanctions were in place. So at that time, the Supreme Leader Khamenei made a decision to have the Revolutionary Guard take charge of infrastructure construction. At that time, the Revolutionary Guard was already a military force far more powerful than Iran's regular army, with vast influence. Khamenei's approach is also easy to understand. By allowing those loyal to him to form a shared interest group, he could both consolidate their loyalty and share the blame for any wrongdoing. Similar examples can be seen in the Chinese Communist Party and Maduro's Venezuela. Khamenei invoked Article 147 of the Constitution to assign a large number of post-war reconstruction projects to the Revolutionary Guard. In 1990, the Revolutionary Guard established an engineering organization called the Khatam al-Anbiya Construction Headquarters, abbreviated as KAA in Persian. The original purpose of KAA was to assist with the country's post-war reconstruction. But in just 10 years, this organization rapidly expanded to become one of the largest contractors in the entire Middle East. By the early 2000s, it already had more than 800 subsidiaries and subcontractors under its umbrella, many of which were registered under civilian names to deliberately conceal their military background. To give a specific example, in 2009, the Iranian government decided to privatize the Iran Telecommunication Company, which is the largest telecom operator in the country. 51% of its controlling shares were sold to a group called the Moben Trust Consortium at a transaction price of $7.8 billion. This was the highest record in the history of the Tehran Stock Exchange. But do you know who this Moben Trust Consortium actually is? It's actually controlled by the Revolutionary Guard. The entire auction process was conducted behind closed doors and took only 1 day. There was no competitive bidding procedure at all. Just like that, the Revolutionary Guard easily gained control over Iran's entire telecommunications infrastructure. And the National Telecommunications Company is just a small piece of the pie under the Revolutionary Guard's control. In 2020, the Iranian parliament released a report revealing a figure. The Revolutionary Guard obtained more than 5,000 national-level projects without any bidding process, over 5,000. and whatever is profitable, they take it, building highways, constructing dams, digging tunnels, laying pipelines, building subways, and even developing oil and gas fields. For example, South Pars is the largest natural gas field in the world, and 2/3 of it lies within Iran. This is Iran's most important strategic asset. In the early 2000s, the Iranian government originally invited oil companies from France, Italy, and Norway to develop it. These companies had experience. But after US sanctions escalated in 2006 and 2010, all these foreign companies withdrew, and then the Revolutionary Guard took over. You have to understand, the institution established by the Revolutionary Guard was a construction company created for post-war reconstruction and had absolutely no experience in developing offshore oil and gas fields. As a result, they went ahead and developed offshore natural gas fields. Of course, the outcome was a complete mess. The project suffered severe delays, development costs skyrocketed, and efficiency was far lower than Qatar's development speed on the same gas field next door. In this way, Iran's public resources were massively wasted and consumed. But the ordinary Iranians working there only earned about $125 a month, and some even went several months without receiving a single cent in wages. So this is how the economic empire of the Revolutionary Guard kept growing larger and larger. Today, just how much of Iran's economy does it actually control? No one can provide an exact figure because its ownership structure is extremely opaque, but various estimates put it at between 1/3 and 2/3 of Iran's GDP. Companies affiliated with the Revolutionary Guard are believed to control at least half of Iran's state-owned enterprises and 68% of its total exports. The budget for 2025 to 2026 shows that the Iranian government has allocated 51% of its oil and natural gas export revenues, about 12 to 13 billion euros, directly to the Revolutionary Guard. An Iranian economist once estimated that from the 1979 Islamic Revolution to 2010, the average Iranian citizen lost between $600,000 and $730,000 in per capita income, while the Revolutionary Guard became exponentially wealthier. The Revolutionary Guard's business empire expanded from its initial focus on construction to include oil, natural gas, telecommunications, automobile manufacturing, real estate, agriculture, shipping, mining, and even laser eye clinics. It owns its own banks, smuggles consumer goods, luxury items, cars, and electronics through free trade zones, and has its own import channels, bypassing sanctions and continuing to do business as usual. Anything that ordinary Iranian entrepreneurs cannot do, members of the Revolutionary Guard can. In addition to its military and economic empire, it also has its own diplomatic system and intelligence organization, with the most central and mysterious being the Quds Force. The name Quds refers to Jerusalem, so the ultimate mission of this force is to one day completely wipe Israel off the face of the earth. The person who built up the Quds Force was Qasem Soleimani, who was killed by the US military in 2020. Under Soleimani's leadership, the Quds Force transformed from an obscure special forces unit into the mastermind behind all evil in Middle Eastern geopolitics. The proxies he supported and controlled included Lebanon's Hezbollah, Palestine's Hamas, the Islamic Jihad organization, pro-Iranian forces in Syria, and Yemen's Houthi militia. These forces are referred to by Iran as the axis of resistance, stretching from the Mediterranean all the way to the Arabian Sea, forming what is known as the Shia Crescent. Before Soleimani's death, his power within Iran was second only to that of Supreme Leader Khamenei. At this point, looking back, you'll realize that the Revolutionary Guard is not just a military force. Over its 47-year history, it has become a state within a state in Iran, with its own army, intelligence agencies, and diplomatic system, as well as its own economic empire and ideological education system. Its budget is classified, its operations are not subject to oversight by the Iranian parliament, and its commanders are accountable only to the supreme leader. And the authority of Iran's supreme leader does not come from being elected by the people, but from a system called the guardianship of the Islamic jurist. However, to truly exercise this extraordinary power, the supreme leader must have an armed force that is absolutely loyal and not constrained by any elected body. So the Revolutionary Guard is essentially this private army. Then, the Supreme Leader uses his power to grant the Revolutionary Guard privileges that make it a state within a state. In return, the Revolutionary Guard uses its military and economic power to ensure the Supreme Leader's absolute and enduring authority, as well as the continuation of the entire Islamic Republic system. This forms a classic closed loop of power, preventing any elected force from challenging the supreme leader's core authority. Just as I was writing this script, news came from Iran that the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, Ghalibaf, has resigned from the negotiation team. He was the key representative for Iran in negotiations with the United States. If this news is true, it means that the hardliners within the Revolutionary Guard have gained the upper hand in this round of internal turmoil in Iran. Why does the Revolutionary Guard want to block negotiations with the United States? Because peace does not serve their interests. If the sanctions are lifted, Western companies come in, and Iran's private enterprises are allowed to compete freely, then the Revolutionary Guard's economic monopoly will no longer be sustainable. If Iran reconciles with the United States, then the so-called axis of resistance loses its purpose, and the Quds Force's budget will disappear as well. More importantly, how could these extremist religious factions, who are bent on wiping Israel off the face of the earth, ever ideologically accept the existence of an Israel that coexists peacefully with them? This is why, every time Iran's reformists or moderates attempt to reach out and reconcile with the outside world, the Revolutionary Guard always steps in to disrupt the process. It was like this during President Khatami's term, it was the same during President Rouhani's term, and even now, when they have been beaten down, it remains unchanged. From this perspective, the Revolutionary Guard's desperate struggle is inevitable. So how will this situation develop next? In this war, in which the United States and Israel have joined forces to strike, Iran's regular army has been almost completely destroyed, and the Revolutionary Guard's strength has also been severely crippled. However, they still have scattered speedboat fleets that can threaten the normal passage through the strait. Yesterday, 3 more ships were attacked and 2 were seized by the Revolutionary Guard, so this contest is not over yet. It all depends on how long this war of attrition to blockade the strait will last before the Revolutionary Guard runs out of ammunition and supplies. What do you all think about this? Please leave me a comment and share your thoughts on the future situation in the Strait of Hormuz and whether you think there's still hope for US-Iran negotiations. Leave me a comment and let me know. Alright, that's all for our discussion today. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoy my program, before you leave, I'd really appreciate your support. Please give me a like and leave a comment to share anything you'd like to say. Every interaction from you helps my video get picked up by YouTube's recommendation system, allowing my voice to reach a wider audience. And of course, if you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to subscribe to True Perspective as well. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode of True Perspective. Don't miss it. Bye.